Good morning and welcome to another episode of Drew's Book Reviews.
Today's book, The Next Mormons by Jana Reese.
Okay, so I just want to preface before we get into the review and discussing the subject matter of The Next Mormons is as someone who was born and raised in the Mormon church and now is what would be called an ex-Mormon, the subject matter of this book is very personal to me personally. And I don't believe that it's even remotely possible for me to come at this review from any kind of unbiased perspective. So I just want to be upfront with that, as I don't think that I could honestly say that I have no bias and to be able to remain neutral on the subject matter because it's something that has been so important for me. So just thought I'd preface my review before we get into the details with that, with respect to the Next Mormons, how millennials are changing the LDS Church. So this book is based off of data that's been collected over several years through social sciences research regarding how the millennial generation and their views of Mormonism have changed, how Mormons within the church of that generation have changed, and how they're perceiving their relationship with the church, and also about why so many ex-Mormons are leaving, or previous Mormons are becoming ex-Mormons within the church. So it kind of focuses on two seemingly contradictory storylines. One, we've got the highly devoted millennial, somebody who is extremely devoted and faithful and strong in their faith to the church. And then you've got the millennials, such as myself, who lost their faith in the church and their ability to continue to support the doctrines and policies of the church. So we kind of got two conflicting stories, and it's really interesting because, especially as a millennial coming from someone who is ex-Mormon, this is very, very fascinating read with respect to the content, the stories that are presented within this book. Specifically talking about why so many Mormons have left the Mormon church. Millennial retention rates specifically within the LDS church are only at about 46%. So over half of Mormons who were born in 1988 or after, between 1980 and 2000, have left the LDS church. And it's just kind of really makes you wonder what is going on, or I want to try and open people's eyes to the reality of what's happening, and that's really what this book is all about. And what we see here is that even the church's own research department has determined that only 30% of actual millennials on the rolls actually attend church. So even amongst the church's own research, people just aren't going to church of that generation anymore. And that was based off of a leaked video. Again, leaked, like the church didn't want this information out there. Back in 2008, of LDS leaders discussing the 30% retention rate in 2008. So who knows what it is a decade later and after that. So some of the interesting stories that we see here is how religion has been used to prey on those who are in a weakened state of mind. And as an example, the 9/11 terrorist attack served as a conversion tool for one person. And she converted to Mormonism as a result because she had to believe that there was something more out there, something to counteract that evil that she saw in the world. So that was kind of a really interesting story in with that respect. What I particularly find interesting as well is all these tools that the church has as an effort to retain members of the church, especially the younger generation. In one respect, they seem to work, and yet in another respect, they don't. For example, the seminary program of the church. So this is an early morning scripture gospel doctrine class that is set up to teach the youth of the church in high school before they attend the regular school doctrines of the church. Those who attend seminary quite regularly seem to have a much stronger rate of retention within the church than those that do not. Now, the thing is, most kids don't actually attend seminary. Now, the church has not made this mandatory in any way. But so while these tools work, the church is struggling to get people to utilize these retention tools that they have. Now, I want to be clear, seminary is not necessarily motivated by retention desire within the church necessarily, but it does seem to be a tool that keeps people within the church longer term, for those that attend anyway, because the majority of people, again, do not attend seminary, have not attended seminary within the church. And I remember personally going to seminary as a kid, as a teenager in the church, LDS church, and it was not something that I'm not a Mormon person, so I didn't really like it. Or really, what happened is it became detrimental, honestly, to my own education, because while I would be awake for the early morning seminary classes, I would often be too tired to function adequately at school. I would fall asleep during my classes. My grades suffered as a result of that. And so the seminary program really didn't have any good benefit for me. And I imagine the same problems are happening now. And it's been proven time and time again that youth need their sleep. They need to be able to be well rested and prepared for school the next day in order to have a positive effect on their education, in order to maintain their grades, to be in an effective state of mind to learn what they need to learn. And seminary, simply put, was detrimental to that. It wasn't something for me that really helped with that. And obviously, it didn't help with retention for my case. But it's really interesting to note that more people stay in the church as a result of seminary than those that versus those that leave. But overall, a minority of people, of kids, actually attend seminary. And some of the other things that really kind of surprised me as well is the those who complete full-time missions in the church. Now, my original understanding was that this was less than 50%, or rather about 50% of return missionaries leave the church. But as it turns out, those who complete a full-time mission have much higher retention rates. But on a side note of that, it also turns out that 3 times as many missionaries are being sent home early from their missions as so much as a single generation ago. And that's a staggering increase overall in early return missionaries. And one of the stories that I really enjoyed within this book is a story of one missionary who uh, started her process of questioning and deconversion while on her mission. Uh, so she was out there preaching with her companion. So with respect to this mission deconversion, so to speak, now just kind of speaking about this one particular story with on her mission, I'll just read to you quickly a passage from the book. It says, oh, yet it was also Jamie's openness to diversity that led to doubts about her faith. I remember talking with a lady who was a Baha'i at one point. She explains, and I remember walking away thinking that her belief system and who she was actually very beautiful. And I could not find fault with it, even though I was supposed to. So she was essentially trained to supposed to find fault with other people's religion and faith as a result of her own faith telling her that she has the only true faith, which is something that I was taught as well. Oddly, an encounter with a Baha'i woman while serving a mission was also the beginning of questions for Lisa, now 32, who in a separate interview told a similar story coming face to face with religious pluralism on an LDS mission. We knocked on a door and a woman immediately started telling me about the Baha'i faith. I was interested, sort of recreationally, but standing there in her foyer, that feeling of spirit came on so strong. I think my companion felt it too. And when we walked out the door and down the sidewalk, I turned to my companion and said, "Did you feel that?" And she said, "Yeah, but I don't want to talk about it." So I told her, even though we didn't understand it, we felt it was God and we needed to listen. So Lisa felt the spirit as forcefully while listening to this woman explain her faith as she often had when defending her own religion to other people whom she had always believed needed the life-altering message she offered them. The experience was confusing to say the least. What if other religions were also true? What if the same litmus test Lisa had applied to the Book of Mormon telling investigators that they would recognize its truth when they experienced good feelings about it also applied to the sacred texts from other religions. To me, it was and is a giant question, she reflects. So this idea that other religions can produce the same internal feelings as she was taught was confirmation from God was a kind of a really eye-opening experience for her and led her to question her own beliefs within the church, which in and of itself is definitely revealing for her and her own understanding of what's going on the mission, what is going on in the church, whether her faith was true or not. And it's all very interesting because, like, within the Mormon church, the mission is kind of seen as a rite of passage for many. The Mormon faith teaches, especially particularly young men, that they need to go on a mission. And for the longest time, the mantra was come home dead or come home honorable. So coming home early was really seen as a very negative thing. It would be better to not go on a mission at all than to come home early. And that's kind of one of the key takeaways from the whole mission experience and what the LDS mission is all about. Now, I personally didn't experience an LDS mission, but that was kind of the mantra itself that a lot had gone through, preparing for a mission, serving a mission. And many do still deconvert while on a mission. As pointed out earlier, the stats show that 3 times as many people are being sent home early than in previous generations for a variety of reasons, not just deconversion or faith-related reasons. So kind of the next thing we'd want, that the book kind of moves on to talk about, is particularly the temple experience. There's one really interesting story that took place in the temple for one individual, particularly the Celestial Room.
Now, this is a picture of the Celestial Room from the Edmonton, Alberta Temple. Important to note that the Celestial Room has some significance in the Mormon Church as the place that's supposed to represent heaven and the dwelling place of God. So, in theory at least, only revelations from God could happen in the temple, as the temple is supposed to be this sacred place of worship and respect with no outside or improper or incorrect revelations can happen.
Now, this one individual who had been questioning the history of the church, he decided to go to the Mormon temple after months and months of praying and trying to figure out what was true, what wasn't true, trying to desperately to get answers. Actually, says that he got his answer in the celestial room of the temple, telling him that he needs to leave the church. Now, what I find fascinating about this, the temple is supposed to be this place that's protected by God, that only good things can happen there, and that only the influence of God could possibly be in the temple. And it's supposed to be this really sacred, holy place, and only a select few Mormons could actually go to. Now, it's interesting to note that even amongst the Mormon faith, despite the significance and sacredness of the temple, still very few people have a temple recommended. We're going to touch on that a little bit later. But essentially, his faith was falling apart, and while he was still worthy to attend the temple, he went and got confirmation that he needed to leave the church, which I find very fascinating. And not a lot of people really know what goes on in the temple. And I find it interesting, again, because this is supposed to be a place where the Holy Spirit has the influence, and no outside forces could possibly influence you to do wrong. It's really a sacred, enshrined place where the perfect peace of God is supposed to reside. And the thing with the temple are kind of 2 rules about the temple in the Mormon culture and belief. One is that you don't talk about the temple, and secondly, the second rule is that if you have to talk about the temple, you keep it vague and always speak positively. But the reality is that many people, especially women particularly, this seems to be the biggest thing with women, is that Generation X members and millennials are not making the temple a priority. Less than half have a temple recommend within that demographic. Now, a temple recommend is this piece of paper that asserts your worthiness to enter the presence of God, basically. You must be vetted by church leadership and go through a series of interviews in order to qualify for a temple recommend, in order to be endorsed by a leader of the church, usually a local leader, such as a bishop who's the head of a congregation. And even those that do have a temple regimen, simply put, are not making it a priority. Temple attendance is pretty low, even among recommend holders. So of the less than half that actually have one, less than half of those are actually going to the temple regularly. And it seems to be issues relating specifically to the patriarchy of the temple ordinance, of the temple ceremony. And this is something that I can absolutely speak to myself. Again, as an ex-Mormon, I have been through the temple ceremony. And the thing with the Mormon temple is men and women are segregated in the temple. Men on one side, women on another. And they don't get to be together essentially, or mix or co-mix within the temple, or be together or sit together until they pass through the veil of the temple, representing passing through the veil of heaven into the eternities. And there's a lot of patriarchy within the ceremony, like things such as like women must vow to be subordinate to their husbands and to obey them, while their husbands swear to obey God, things like that. As well as the fact that a husband must bring his wife, through the veil into the kingdom of heaven, but it's not the other way around for the women. People are given a special name, or a sacred name, as the Mormon Church believes it to be. And while women must reveal this sacred name to their husbands in order to pass into heaven, the husbands do not have to, are sworn to secrecy, never to tell their wives what this secret name is. So that is really kind of the patriarchy within the LDS temple. And those are some examples, seem to be a really big driver force behind people leaving the church, or simply not attending the temple and not wanting to. And that seems to be, that was highlighted in here, and I thought I did a really good job of doing so. As we move on through the book, it touches more on issues relating to marriage. And more, we're seeing that more young adults are viewing marriage as something that is desirable, but only after achieving other things, such as an education and finding. And in many ways, Jana Reese explains that the social sciences have bolstered the idea that delaying marriage can in fact be wise and a good idea, versus getting married really young, which has generally been the trend within the LDS Church. It's extremely young marriages. And getting married early can be a factor in both divorce, financial hardship, kind of things like that. And the funny thing is, I always knew growing up that the pressure for young women to get married was pretty low, or pretty high, pretty high. And it was huge, often also for men, but also quoted and oft-quoted, but wrongly attributed, saying was that any young man not married by the age of 25 was a menace to society. This was repeated constantly throughout my upbringing within the Mormon Church. And the funny thing is, and I gotta be honest, I got married really, really young. I got married around, I would have been 21 when I got married. I can say that at least at the time, I didn't feel that kind of pressure to get married. Because I got married so young, it was just something I knew was going to happen. I didn't really think about the context or why I was getting married so young, or if there are other factors other than the fact that I fell madly in love with my wife. And there have been times where I've looked back on that and thought, well, kind of think it would have been better for me to get married later in life, at an older age, sometime between 25 and 30 instead of so young. And while I certainly don't regret marrying my wife, she has been an anchor to me and a wonderful, amazing person. The best choice I ever made. I'm very happy to have married her and cannot possibly imagine regretting marrying her at all. But to marry so young, I think it definitely would have been better to get married at a later age. And so I never really imagined what it would be like to be a 25-year-old or older man in the church, and not being married, considering all that pressure. I didn't really understand that. But as one singles ward, so singles ward is a congregation within the church where they're all put together into a single ward, for singles to meet and get married. That is the entire purpose. And one singles ward bishop kind of noted that they were told essentially by young men in the church as well, over 25, how they were suffering severe depression, and because they hadn't been able to get married or find a partner by the age of 25. So that pressure is truly there, and it's huge. And this is a problem within the church, one that I didn't even realize was there to any great extent, and that's huge. And I think Jana Rice does a good job in really bringing to light these issues and highlighting them to kind of bring awareness to those issues. In fact, seems to comment a bit as well on the idea that the young single adults in the church are still often treated like children, and that many young single adults have felt infantilized and treated as if they were children, being treated with things like juice boxes and little kids' games, as kind of and fruit snacks and things like that. They're 20 something years old and they're being treated like they're children, 7, 8, or 9 years old. Boyd K. Packer is quoted saying, "The one word that's been missing in all this is family. It hasn't been said once. The original jurisdiction until they're married is in the parental home in the family." So even Boyd K. Packer, one of the church's LDS apostles, kind of emphasizes this idea that if you're not married, then you're still a child and you should be at home under the jurisdiction of your parents. And this really doesn't help to reinforce any kind of respect for these people's adulthood. And that's really something that, well, I didn't experience myself because I was married so young. And maybe that was a good thing, I don't know. But it really kind of helps solidify this idea that the church and the leadership view young unmarried people as nothing more than essentially children. And that's definitely an issue within the church. One that I didn't even realize was there. So Jana Reese, definitely eye-opening to that. That was excellent for her to include this. It really kind of puts that in a new perspective within that, which I think is really great. And I'm glad that that was there. So there's also an entire section within this book about the cultural racism within the church. Many people experience firsthand. Now, the book does seem to conclude that these issues are more cultural than doctrinal, and I don't have any experience suffering from any kind of racism within the church itself. I can say for certain that while there are definitely some racism doctrines within the church, specifically relating to black people, and the Book of Mormon speaks of them as wicked and adulterous people with the black skin. But definitely those things aren't really talked about within the church. They're not really preached from the pulpit, despite being included in the church's scriptures. So definitely does seem to be more of a cultural than a doctrinal issue at this point. But I can say that I do remember speaking to one active LDS individual while I was still Mormon, and they definitely personified these racist ideas within the church. She was speaking of the idea that the black people and the white people were separated by God with purpose and intent, and that they shouldn't intermarry, they shouldn't associate with each other. And she kind of started this statement by saying, well, it's not racism, but so definitely that cultural racism is still there within the church. And one area that's definitely shows that is the 1978 reversal of the blacks in the priesthood and temple worship, which then allowed them to go in it. But those issues have still systemically carried over. It can still be a problem culturally, at least, within the LDS community. So next, kind of move on to the LGBTQ issues, which were certainly a big part of this as well. And what I'm really happy to see is that amongst millennial Mormons is that acceptance of the LGBTQ community has doubled in a single generation, whereas our parents' generation, it was about 24% acceptance, and now it's at 48%. Now, this is still too low as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely still low. It should be some dramatically higher, ideally 100% acceptance, which I would love to see. But even though the number is still low, too low for my opinion, I'm very glad to see that the trend is on an upward velocity. And it's really great to see that with the information presented in this book. Very glad to see that, which is really, really awesome. But the problem is the LDS Church can't or won't acknowledge the existence of LGBTQ people in its former documents. And that is always an issue for me as well. As a lot of the documents, handbooks for the church, they will use terms like same gender attraction. They won't use gay. They won't use anything other than that. And they will only acknowledge a relationship to be legitimate if it is one's gender based on what genitals they were born with and not their gender identity. For example, a trans woman could be attracted to a cisgendered heterosexual woman, and that would be fine with the church because a trans woman has a penis and is anatomically male, and vice versa. And that, as far as they're concerned, that attraction's fine because it is, in their eyes, a man being attracted to a woman, not a woman being attracted to a woman. Although, now one of the things here that is definitely a key in this whole situation is what has become known as the November 2015 policy of the Mormon Church. Okay, and that is the end of part 1. Make sure that you go and check out part 2. I will put the link in the description. Look forward to seeing you there. See you in part 2.